Welcome to my Views of My Own podcast. If you're listening to this on a podcast app, please leave a 5-star rating or a nice review. Here's a couple ideas for a nice review. You could say, I liked this. It was good. It was fine. All of those are totally acceptable reviews, and I would really appreciate that. If you're watching this on YouTube, smash that like button and hit subscribe. That's my new YouTuber voice. Did that work? Did that feel authentic?
Very, very authentic. Yeah.
My guest today is Joe Mayall. Mayall?
Mayall. Yeah.
Mayall. I can't believe I messed up your last name. That's the first thing I did was
That's fine. Yeah.
Mayall. My guest today is Joe Mayall. Joe is a writer and labor activist from Denver, Colorado. He's written for, watch me mispronounce another word, Jacobin.
Nailed it.
Hell yeah. The Progressive Magazine, Prism, and other leading political publications. You can find his work at joewrote.com after you're done listening to this episode if you want a lot more info. What's up, Joe?
Nothing much, Doug. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Okay, so here's one of the things that's so hard about interviewing like a political journalist in America in these times is so what we postponed this by 4 days. And in those 4 days, things have changed. And that's the thing with this, it's just like historical event. And if I had interviewed you on the day we were supposed to record, we would have probably recorded 1 hour before the alleged shooting at the Trump rally. I mean, I know gunshots were fired. The alleged assassination attempt is, I guess, is what I meant to say.
Yeah. Maybe it would have come through like as we were recording and we could have done some breaking news and both tried to understand what the hell was going on. But I think we pardon my metaphor here, but I think we dodged a bullet, and now we can
Yeah.
at least have 4 more days of knowledge and actual clarity
Yeah.
to talk about stuff like that.
4 more days. 4 more days. Okay, so I want to clarify why I'm using the word alleged, and because I've had some um, real jerk offs say some things to me on the internet about me being slightly suspicious about the way that went down. And also, guys, I want to promise everyone we're not going to talk about this fucking photo op for very. We're just talking about the interesting fact that if we hadn't postponed, but I am going to squarely lay this all at the feet of Russell Brand. Russell Brand, as many of you know, he was in a movie called Forgetting Sarah Marshall. That might be about all he's done. But he's spent his, most of his career kind of portraying himself as a flamboyant intellectual, who's always like, listen, darling, and I'm so smart and blah, blah, blah. And now he's just a giant Trump, you know, dick rider. And he came out with this whole thing. It's very popular. It's getting shared a lot on social media, and it's him saying that if anybody in the media uh, points out that a lot of those events of the other day, the shooting, seem suspicious, seem staged, then you're a complete wanker, as he would say. He didn't say you're a wanker, but you know what I mean. That's what he meant.
Yeah. I did not know Russell Brand was on that train. Last I heard of him, he was going down the Jesus rabbit hole. But I feel like the archetype of like, oh, I'm a YouTuber now. I'm just, I'm politically homeless, independent, free thinker. They all end up as Trump guys. So that
Yeah,
doesn't really surprise me. I also think that's where the money is. So
yeah,
that checks out. But it is pretty wild that because he used to be somewhat, I don't know if sensible is the right word, but somewhat like, just as I understood him, kind of like a Joe Rogan knockoff where he would like interview people and stuff. And I remember he had a show for a while, but yeah, last I checked in on him, he was fully off the rails. So that doesn't surprise me that he's all aboard the MAGA train. That seems like the
yeah.
natural conclusion of his character arc.
Well, it's a funnel. So when you said Joe Rogan, he's a repeat Joe Rogan guest, and
Of
I feel like
course.
a lot of guys, especially like ones like him who start out. I mean, even Alex Jones is an example of someone who started out portraying themselves as like an arbiter of truth and liberty, and slowly just became a Trump guy, or actually, it seemed like almost overnight became a Trump guy, kind of like 2016. But I feel like so many people that like yeah portrayed themselves as something else, like they go on Joe Rogan like 3 times and then they've just like morphed.
Yeah, the first time you like Joe tells you like, hey, maybe we like don't write off Trump, and you're like, okay, whatever. The second time he like convinces you a little bit more, and then the third time you're to Rogan's right, and you're the one arguing like, we gotta storm the fucking Capitol, man. Like this is we gotta take this country back. It is. I wonder if he's the accelerator in all this because there's
Yeah,
probably like a correlation out there between number of Joe Rogan appearances and likelihood that you own a Make America Great Again hat.
I don't have a Joe Rogan impression yet. I haven't heard his voice in a long time because the last time I heard a Joe Rogan podcast was probably 2015, but it's something like have you he's got, he has a bit of like a kind of an arc going on in his voice when he asks a question, like, have you tried DMT while you do jujitsu? Because that might convince you. Um, anyway, like I said, man, I almost been as we're not talking about Trump's photo op for more than another couple seconds, but I just read your latest article this morning. You chimed in, rightfully so. So just for real, we'll just do a quick true or false question. America is a country that does not condone political violence. True or false?
False. 100% false. Yeah.
False.
Yeah.
But but I've seen so many politicians come out in the past few days and say that political violence is never acceptable to Americans. Can you give some examples of how that's untrue? Because I,
Yeah, that was my takeaway from the whole thing. Like you said, there's a lot of theories out there. Like, is it staged? Who was this shooter? As far as we know, he seemed to be kind of just like a 20-year-old with a lot of friends, the profile that we see a lot with like mass shootings. I'm not too concerned with that stuff right now. I'm sure answers will come out. What I'm most focused on, what I wrote about, is the fact that, like you said, we get all these people from Donald Trump himself to Barack Obama saying America hates political violence. This is not who we are, our democracy, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just not true, right? Like if we start at the top, Donald Trump is the chief inciter of domestic political violence, right? Everything from January 6th to telling people to fight, fight, fight right after he stood up after getting shot at. Barack Obama famously expanded the drone program. He overthrew governments in Libya, tried in Syria for political reasons. And then we can just look domestically at basically anything from the history of the CIA and the FBI assassinating Black civil rights leaders to even just 2020, the crackdown on peaceful Black Lives Matters protests by, local police departments. So what I wrote about is the fact that just like the idea that we're somehow above political violence, and this is something that happens elsewhere, and then people will say like, we're not a third world country. Like, what is this? Like, that's horseshit. Political violence is very much in our nature. It's written in our Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And we actually just celebrated the 4th of July, which is a holiday commemorating political violence that we
yeah,
fought a revolutionary war.
yeah,
And so whatever you think about what happened on Saturday, like all these messages are just, in my opinion, typical like that American arrogance where we just tell ourselves somehow we're different and better than everybody else. And I just think that is unequivocally false. Yeah.
yeah. It would be amazing if just one outlier, uh, like some I would say it'd be cool if it was a senator, someone kind of a little bit higher, not just a backwater congressman, but a senator said actually untrue. We uh what would you call like when Trump had I don't know if it was the police or the National Guard, but when he had them shoot tear gas into a crowd of Black Lives Matter protesters so that he could go hold a Bible upside down in front of a church. That's
Yeah.
that's political, certainly, and I would say shooting tear gas at protesters is violence. If I don't know, I mean,
I think that's pretty unequivocally violent. He also, I
yeah,
think that was the event where he tried to get a and they told him he couldn't do this because it's actually like a war crime issued in the Geneva Convention, I believe. He tried to get I believe it was a Coast Guard helicopter, medic helicopter, to dust off those protesters, which is when they fly really low, so that the downward force of the helicopter winds like physically pushes you aside. Whether we look at that or tear gassed or just, truncheoning the protesters, the
Yeah.
idea that this man is somehow some like angel who doesn't like political violence is directly untrue. And it's only because he's a member of the American political class that we're all coming out with these oh, I condemn political violence in the strongest of terms, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are hypocrites. You can ignore those statements.
Yeah, that is bullshit. And I don't want to lay all of it at Trump's door or Russell Brand's, although they both suck. Because I would say, I've seen a lot of. I'm not even gonna go overseas just yet. I'm not even gonna say. I'm not gonna talk about the atrocities happening overseas. Um, but I will say this because we're just right now we're just talking about domestic, political violence, basically. I mean, for the most part, I've seen a lot of videos of like cops like beating the living shit out of a professor for joining the students in a protest, beating the shit out of the students, arresting the students, having the students expelled from these schools, fucking with their lives, trying to hit them with like these bogus sentences. Um, Once again, I what I want to say is, look, dude, we could debate what constitutes political violence until the cows come home.
Yeah.
And every time you make a valid point, I could say, well, actually, and then I could, just say, I could change the subject or I could make up a lie. Like that's a good way to debate. And guess what? I use that as a segue to our first actual topic of the day, which is why conservatives fetishize debate. I read an
Ooh.
article that you wrote on this exact subject. Let's start on the surface. How would you define like the Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder sphere of debate? It's a two-part question, and what do those types of people hope to accomplish? By going to a college campus and trying to find someone who's uneducated on a subject and beat them in a debate. What's the point?
First off, great segue. That's professional podcasting right there,
Thank you very
folks.
much.
Um, what I think those conservatives are up to is really, and I guess you could make an argument that the word debate isn't really the right term. They're almost like shock jockeys what they're doing, because it's one thing if Ben Shapiro says, I'm going to debate, I don't know, a left-wing professor who has different views than me. And we're going to have a moderator and it's going to be in good faith. And we're going to go back and forth and make our arguments. And then whoever watches it can decide, right? But what these guys do is they predominantly go to college campuses. They find someone, or they let people who, are undergrads, who are not professional political commentators, come up to the microphone, say their piece, and then Ben Shapiro, quote unquote, destroys, owns transgender college kid woke social justice war, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing is they're creating content. And that's really how these guys have made their career, specifically on YouTube, because YouTube algorithms love that type of content. But what they're doing besides that is they are requiring certain beliefs to be elevated on parity with other ones. And I'll give you an example. If I said to someone, I want to kill your dog, and they said, absolutely not, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And I said, well, debate me about it. If it's so crazy, you should be able to easily refute my points. Come on, what are you, scared? And then if they come and debate me, what I've just done is I've set a playing field where killing your dog and letting your dog live are starting at the same spot, right? And that's an absurd relationship. Me just killing someone's dog is, nonsensical. There's no reason for it. But when I propose it as a debate and this sort of intellectual framing, I'm giving it the groundwork where an audience member will be like, okay, let's find out if Joe should be able to kill Doug's dog, which is, of course, absurd. And so they do that a lot with stuff like, whatever your politics are, like, should we execute women who get an abortion? Because I believe that's murder. And most people would be like, that is absolutely absurd. Even if I'm quote unquote pro-life, I don't want to do that. But when Ben Shapiro challenges someone to a debate, he's elevating that to a neutral place. And because the people he's debating are 18-year-olds who have never spoken into a microphone or a public platform in their entire life, he easily wins.
Yeah.
And so that's really why they love it so much. And you'll see this a lot with, it's even bled outside the entertainment culture. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene will constantly yell at Congress people during like their floor hearings, debate me, not realizing that she is in Congress, which is where you're actually supposed to debate. But what
Yeah.
she means is come on my YouTube show and I can, I don't know, whatever she's up to right now, tell you that uh, Jews control the weather or whatever her nonsense is. And so it's really a way for them to launder despicable politics into the mainstream. And then, of course, there's also just the added benefit of it gets them clicks. It gets that red meat YouTube content they love, and boosts their career. So it's a
Yeah.
win-win for them.
Yeah. Man, oh God, there's so much to pull out of there. I was thinking too, like the dog debate. Like Joe wants to kill Doug's dog, moderated by Christy Nome.
Yeah, right.
And then and I actually I don't know who you were speaking to. This is so interesting. So before you were coming on the show, one of your tweets that I didn't see on, like, I don't even go on Twitter. One of your tweets made it into Instagram and like stories. So I guess it went pretty viral, but it's a reply. And I don't know if it's Marjorie Taylor Greene, but when you kept saying her screaming like, debate me, I was just thinking of her, her just screaming bait me. And then the point is, to everyone who hasn't seen what I'm talking about, it made some rounds though, and I was kind of stoked. I was like, oh shit, it's coming on the podcast. And
Nice.
people are really finding this funny. Some teenage boy, sadly, his mother is, I think, in Congress, and she took a picture of his, let's say, room, and there's a lot of Trump flags, and that's what she was really proud of. But there was also a lot of very like kind of weird, like his big screen TV is like set up on his bed in such a bizarre way, like. And you said, "Oh my God, you just outed his goon cave," or something of that nature.
Yeah, I, the kid's face is not in it,
Yeah, no,
which is why I did this. But like, basically, she took a picture of his room, and he has, like you said, the TV like right over his bed, and then next to him is just a box of like four things of lotion and Kleenexes and stuff. And so this mom just took a picture of what is clearly where her teenage son masturbates and posted it online. And before I even commented on it, she had like 50,000 likes or something. She's some like
yeah.
right wing influencer or something.
Oh,
Um, and it was just absolutely absurd because my first thought was this is a joke. And then she like doubled down and she was like, no, he would never. And it was like, all right, lady, like that's the thing though.
yeah,
Like they'll do anything for the clicks. They'll like, I mean, even if
anything.
that's not there, you shouldn't take a photo of your kid's room and publish it online. Like I'm
Fucking
not a parent and I wouldn't
fucking
do that.
freak. Fucking
Yeah.
freak. Your teenage son too. Like at the point in their like at the point and then like to an audience of at least 50, you said 50,000 likes, so to an audience of possibly a million people. Uh
Millions.
but yeah, I think that the reason I thought that was salient was just bringing it back to it's all about clicks. So with the Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, I think you had mentioned, I don't even know if this guy's even still alive. Milo Yiannopoulos, that fucking guy.
Oh, he's still alive. Oh yeah, he's out
Did
there.
I know he went to like gay conversion therapy. I know that was the last I heard of him is just he went and electroshocked himself straight, and that was his big comeback into the right wing like
He's actually been
discourse.
staffing for Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's
That
been one
is
of her staffers since he came back.
insane.
Yeah.
Man, can you imagine just like how it must be like in their offices, like them talking, like the shit they fucking say and believe.
It's a fucking fever dream, man. Like I listen to these people talk and it sounds like what I imagine it's like if you have like the bubonic plague and you're hallucinating before you die, like in your
Yeah.
last final moments. And like, I can only imagine what they say in private. Although I wouldn't be surprised if they just have no filter and everything they say in public is what they say in private, because
Yeah.
I can't imagine it getting much worse. I say
Yeah.
that, but of course things will always get worse.
It'll
So,
get worse. And then
um,
Elon Musk will comment on it. He'll go, wow,
interesting.
interesting.
You raise a
Milo
good point.
Milo Yiannopoulos will say, I electrocuted myself straight to get rid of all the gay bugs in my blood, and now I'm mandating that this is a federal law. And
Mhm.
Elon will go, "Wow,
Make some good
interesting.
points. Yeah.
Should research this."
He's a good exam. If the listeners don't know who Milo Yiannopoulos is, don't look him up. Save yourself the trouble.
All right.
He was like a big 2015, 2016 Ben Shapiro knockoff, but was even more horrific. He eventually got, I guess you'll call it canceled, because he straight up said that older men should be allowed to have sex with younger boys, and like went and just took the shock jockey thing too far, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's kind of, there's a lesson in there about what they're all trying to do is like Shapiro's, Crowder's, etc. Of course, they're in league with each other, but they're all trying to be like the leading voice. And so they're
Yeah.
always competing with each other, right? And you'll see their rhetoric move over time where they'll say abortion should be illegal. What's the next step after that? We should have some sort of requirement system for women's uteruses. And eventually they end up at like, we should just kill all abortion doctors. And Yiannopoulos was doing that, trying to like outright everyone else when Trump was, his 2016 run, and he just overstepped. And I think he got uninvited from the Republican National Convention first, and that was or maybe it was CPAC, and that was kind of the thing that broke the dam. That was like, maybe we shouldn't actually advocate for pedophilia, even if
Yeah.
it does own the libs. Like that might be a bridge too far.
Yeah.
Um, but he's back in, he's a
Odd.
congressional staffer now. So what does that say? That's like a pretty well-esteemed job, I would say.
I
Yeah.
wonder how I'm sure he's back making money again in some kind of grift. But that is wild to be like, oh, listen here, liberal. I'm in NAMBLA.
Yeah. Speaking of, he was a frequent Joe Rogan guest back in the day. I think it was on Joe Rogan's podcast where he said like, I should be able to have sex with a little boy.
Oh, when he first
And
was like,
Rogan was like,
he's in the North
Rogan,
American Man Boy Love Association, or
something like that. Yeah. Some crazy right-wing group that probably had
yeah,
$1 billion. And even
Marjorie.
Rogan was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Have you tried jujitsu with GMT? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like, come on, like it, like I, Joe Rogan. You don't have to like just let somebody say that and be like, oh, okay. Like you don't have to do that. All
Yeah.
right. So look, we got caught up a little bit too much in the sphere of these. It's just that they're interesting because you know they're in the media. I do media, you do media, and we like to take little shots at them. And like, and I'm not gonna go ahead and say like the only thing that it happens on the left, like Jordan Klepper. He goes to uh Trump events and finds the dumbest fucking people, and but I would say he does it in the name of comedy, not in the name of like, look at me, I'm the smartest debater in the world.
Hmm.
So I love you, Jordan Klepper. You're cool. You're not canceled.
Yeah, I think that's the difference, right? Like the Daily Show, they're clearly trying to make you laugh. I don't think they'd ever be like, okay, this should be the policy proposal based off of what this drunk guy at a Trump rally said.
Yeah.
Which I think what really marks the modern conservative movement is just the absence of non-hacks. Where I think someone on the more liberal side would be like, okay, like, yeah, I found this guy, I made fun of him, we'll put it on TV, but we're not gonna like try and write like a policy paper based off of this. And Ben Shapiro, has direct lines to congressmen, and he's using these college quote unquote debates to be like, this is evidence that my ideas are good. Um,
And that's
if you want to do that,
exactly
you should debate someone who knows what they're talking about, in my
but
opinion.
that's exactly where I wanted to go with this. And I know that we said a lot of like what it is and why they do it, but so these people are kind of on the surface of the people you see like they don't make policy, and you rarely see the people that do. You probably don't know the names of most of the people they do, but like I said, you got your Ben Shapiro's of the world using debate for clicks on a deeper lever on a deeper level. Uh, how is debate used by conservatives to affect actual policy? And, and I assume it's in much the same way, but just in it's a little bit more nefarious.
Yeah, I think there's two ways. One, I think that sort of online, mostly let's call it like own the lib style stuff, is used to provide cover. One, it attracts, I think the word reactionary is justified, but you could even say just like specifically young white men, but people who are looking for like entertainment, I think, and really want something to believe in. And so someone might be a fan of Ben Shapiro, take like a young 22-year-old who stumbles across his videos, who probably, smokes pot, has underage sex, or not underage sex, has unmarried sex, things like that. And those are policies that someone like Ben Shapiro doesn't want, right? He's
Yeah.
very adamant that you should not have sex outside of marriage, divorce should be illegal, weed should be illegal, stuff like that. But because he's a fan of Ben Shapiro, when Ben Shapiro says vote for Trump, he will do that. I think that's one way. The other way, I think, is that it really just, how can I put this? It provides a way for them to almost distract, right? Like Republicans are not very forward with their espoused policies. And I'll give you an example where, there's been a lot of media attention on Project 2025, which is the Heritage Foundation's wish list for the next Republican president. And a lot of that stuff is scaring people, such as for example, pornography should be illegal. And of course, in order to enforce that, you're going to have to watch everyone's computers. We're talking about massively expanding the surveillance state. Young men do not want pornography to be illegal. I think it's like 5% of the country favors laws on that and stuff. But because their like favorite quote unquote YouTube personality, which is how they see these people, is like, yeah, the Heritage Foundation is great. That kind of gets them to go along. They give like the very red meat culture war stuff, it's fun for them to say trans people shouldn't exist and they debate a trans kid. The policy of telling doctors they can't prescribe hormone treatment is something those people would probably not be comfortable with, but it never gets to that level because in their mind, they're just seeing it as, hell yeah, we're owning the libs like Ben does on a larger level. That's how I really see it because I've never seen like Republicans come out and lay out like the things that are in their policy platforms and run on them, right? There's a lot of rhetoric. Think about Ron DeSantis talking about like, we got to punch back on the elites, and he's, funded by Elon Musk and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, you can't get more elite than that. It's only aesthetics.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like you said, like the kill your dog debate, you can kind of take that to the floor of Congress in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, and like you said, their policies are unpopular. People don't like them. Even people who have they're been a registered Republican their entire lives and they always vote Republican. But if you broke it all the way down to some of the things they're saying, like you shouldn't be allowed to get a divorce based on the fact that you want one, which is
Yeah.
it's one of the big ones they're trying to push. A lot of people would say that's fucking insane. That's but you're voting for the guys pushing this shit, and as long as people are willing to accept it accept that debate, you like you said, you've elevated it to the same level as women should be allowed to have rights. Or just
Yeah.
so it's a slippery slope letting them debate, which brings me to kind of like what I was going to say about myself is that just in a way like I've grown to despise the idea of debate. Uh, I won't debate anyone about anything fucking ever just because I like after all, especially the past how many fucking years has it been now? 8 years of this like really, really intense kind of like MAGA-ism, like conservative debate fetishization, all that kind of shit. And but obviously that's not great if you're trying to grow intellectually. Like I should be able to debate uh, a friend or colleague or someone I find, if you and I disagreed on something, I should be able to
Mm.
debate you. But it's like I have a almost visceral dislike for debate now because it's not about whether which idea is better. It's about who spent more time like watching YouTube videos on debate tricks and how to like
Yeah.
trick your opponent into making a faux pas and fucking him up. But I like to I like to do more than just kind of point out what's bad and like to try to talk about how do you fix that. And do you have any advice for other people that are experiencing, like, let's call it debate fatigue, like something you might do as like as a healthy exercise?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. I as someone who works in political media, like I try not to write off debate entirely. What I tend to do is like think about like if you came up to me, Doug, and you said like, "Hey, I think X, but you think Y. Let's debate that." I think like, okay, why is Doug doing this? Is Doug acting in good faith? Does he actually want to like see if his ideas hold up? Does he want to learn more about my ideas? Like, what is going on here? If you're trying to, a lot of people like think debate is some sort of like prove who's smartest and own the other person. I don't put any time into that. I think I said in that article, there was a guy who followed me around social media commenting on all my posts like debate me, debate me, debate me. And he wanted to debate if the Nazis were socialists. And like in my view, that's just Holocaust revisionism, which I
Yeah,
have no interest in doing, right? So I
yeah.
kind of just told him to fuck off and ignored him. But I do think like, when my friend asked me like, hey, like how does universal healthcare work? Like I heard that would like bankrupt us. Like what's going on? Like I should have answers to those. So my advice to anyone would be think about who you're talking to. Like, is this going to be a beneficial conversation? If the answer is yes, I, you know, I think it's fine to engage, but don't feel any obligation to argue with people, especially if they're trying to use you for like internet clout points or even their own like you said, a lot of people just lie and make things up in debate, which is one of the reasons debate is not really a useful exercise in discerning what's right. If you've ever been part of a sports debate, like people will just like either willingly or ignorantly make up stats and be like, oh my God, well, Tom Brady threw for over 50,000 yards in 2014. And like,
Yeah.
you don't have a computer in front of you. You have no idea if that's true. So don't feel obligated. You're under no obligation. But at the same time, like if you want to have a healthy conversation with someone, I would encourage you. And it's also perfectly fine to say, I haven't thought about that. Like, let me look into it and get back to you. Right. Like a lot of times people think that they have to have a concrete answer for everything or some unknowable logic. You don't. You can say like, oh, that's a good point, I hadn't considered that, I'll have to look into that, right? So don't feel pressured. It's really this thing where I hate how it's trickled down into like everyone feeling like they have to debate a lot. It's very strange in my opinion. Like that used to be a thing that was only done between like academics or politicians who were trying to convince people. And because Ben and Co started doing it with like 18-year-old average people, everyone else started thinking like, oh, well, I can do that to my college sister who I don't like.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't take it too seriously. You can also tell someone to go kick rocks. Like that's
Yeah.
fine. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and especially if you don't respect the opinion of the person who's trying to debate you, most, absolutely don't engage in that shit. Like, I'll tell you, and this is something that's been coming back a lot. So, a word I don't use on this podcast, but I'm just gonna go ahead and say it because when I came out and said that the shooting was staged, got a lot of people calling me the R word, like, and I thought that was kind of like on its way out, but no, it's not.
Yeah.
And I was like, this I'm not gonna debate you. Like that's
Yeah.
fucked up. That you're fucked up. You're a fucked up person. Like Eat
Like
shit
that's a good
and
sign,
die. Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah,
Like no one's gonna like call you a slur and then like engage with you in good faith, right? Like
yeah,
if they like there's nothing to gain there, you're just gonna piss yourself off and feel worse about the world. So yeah, tell them to screw off. Like that's
yeah.
a totally fine response to debate me. No, I don't care about you. I don't care about your opinions. That's totally fine. Yeah.
Also, if we want to have a contest about who could be meaner, actually, we have an episode. It's been on hold for a while. It might come out. It's called Doug Responds to the Haters. I have saved some of the funniest, most misspelled, most ignorant fucking shit that people have said to me for things I've, you know, from this podcast. And I'm thinking about just doing an entire episode where where because they don't get answers from me online. I don't, like I said, I don't fucking debate. I don't, fuck them. But in a vacuum where they can't defend themselves, I think it actually might be worth my while. Hey,
That would be fun. That would be good. Yeah. I
quick
like that.
quick interlude. This is off topic, man, because we just kind of have a parasocial friendship. I've never met you. You're in Colorado, right? So
Correct.
I
Yeah.
just I just
Denver.
see you on the internet. Are you a competitive fighter? I've seen clips of you
Jujitsu.
fighting jujitsu.
Yeah. Um, I dabbled in like mixed martial arts and kickboxing when I was younger, but I don't really need the brain trauma. So I just kind of stay with wrestling, jujitsu, that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so it's more just like competing just only within in that sport, or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't really have any interest in getting punched at the head at this point in my life. Yeah.
Well, actually, I disagree with you because Muay Thai is the superior martial art.
Like that stuff, right? It's like
and that's
people
how
will argue about that all day, and it's
and
like,
that is
okay, agree to disagree.
that is how you fucking debate right there, man.
Yeah.
All right, all you smarty pants out there in listener land, it's time for a history lesson. Uh, Joe, who the heck was James Madison, and what the gosh darn fuck are the Federalist Papers?
That is a great question.
Thank you.
People might remember the Federalist Papers from like their high school history class or something like that. Basically, to put my history teacher hat on, Federalist Papers were, let's call them debates because the founders were obsessed with that type of stuff. But when the US Constitution was written, there were two groups, the Federalists, and I can't remember the name of the Anti-Federalists, but basically the Federalists wanted to ratify the Constitution and say this is our new government. The Anti-Federalists did not. And so the Federalist Papers were written by Thomas Madison and two other of the founders anonymously arguing um, for people to accept the Constitution. And
Wait, did you mean James Madison?
James Madison, I'm sorry. I think Thomas Jefferson was one of the other anonymous ones. I messed that up. But basically, what's important to remember with the Federalist Papers is that a lot of the common people, like me and you, Doug, at this time, wouldn't be able to read. So when they're writing, they're only writing to, let's call them the American aristocracy, right?
Yeah.
Like the rich people, business owners, landowners, that sort of stuff. And so it's pretty interesting because the founders are very blatant about their ideas because it's almost like a private group chat between them and all the other rich people in America.
Yeah.
So they're just saying shit out loud. Specifically, the one I wrote about, Federalist 10, is where Madison just kind of says, like, oh, like we should take this form of republic because it will have just enough democracy to like give to help us solve our problem, but it won't give the poor people the power to vote to seize all of our money, all of our land, stuff like that. And he just blatantly says it, right? Like he
Yeah.
he specifically refers to factions where he says we should have a larger republic, like a larger representative, a senate, because that will allow people to come in with their factions, right? So while there might be a lot of poor people, they'll be divided between the factions of Catholicism and Protestantism, and they'll fight over that. Meanwhile, we can just sort of sit back and, keep collecting our money and stuff like that. And so I thought that was I wrote about that because I thought that was really interesting because we have this idea of America's founding as like, a bunch of guys got in a room and they were like, we need to create the best, most equitable system possible. And that wasn't really their intention. They were very honest that they didn't think some people should be allowed to vote. They didn't think a lot of people were worthy of being allowed to, have a say in the government. And they really did try and create what we would call like an oligarchy in some sense. I'll remind people that I don't think it was until I want to say I can't remember the amendment, but we didn't directly elect senators until after the Civil War. So for a long time, these people were just like, I guess, party insiders, right? Some rich
Yeah.
guy in your state would get to go and vote on without you having a say. So yeah, I thought that was really fun to kind of go through Federalist 10 and kind of poke out all the myths of America's founding that I found.
Yeah, dude. The yeah, the myth of the egalitarian founding fathers. And don't get me wrong, the US Constitution is way better than like the king that we
Yeah.
it's better. And I'm not some like I'm not like, just a complete jackass. But I mean, we are going to look at the same people who, the 3/8 of human beings, people. And like you said, they said that shit mask off because they knew that most people couldn't read it or have any say in it. And so it was the slave owners themselves that were like, well, technically, we're going to make up a math equation that and apply it to people so that we're not committing a fucking human rights violation. Um, but man, I wish I could attribute this to whoever was the one who wrote it. It's literally, I think it's just a tweet. That's all it is. But it's somebody who wrote, it was kind of like, I think maybe in quotation marks, that said, the founding fathers thought, dot, dot, dot. And then it said like, A, you're probably wrong. And B, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
um,
You're right. Yeah.
and,
I'm
and the,
always amazed how many people like kept the worldview that like middle school history taught them. Like like that's strange to me that people were just like, I know how this went and I never need to examine it critically. Especially people who are like vocal about their politics, right? Like you'll run into people online or just in their street who are like, we have the greatest system. It's perfect. No need to change it. And it's like, man, like, who told you that? Like Mrs. Smith when you were in the
yeah.
fifth grade? Like, what? What are you doing?
Oh, so close, dude. My fourth grade teacher was named Mrs. Smith.
Oh, that would have been
She was actually probably one of my favorite teachers I've ever had. That's why I remember her name to this day. Isn't that crazy? Fourth grade teacher, still know her name.
that's
Don't know
pretty
her first name,
impressive.
but
Yeah.
I wasn't really on a first name basis with her. Uh, but yeah, that's like people like I find the silliest people are the Columbus Day celebrators that are like enthusiastic because
Mm.
I drove up to Kentucky a couple weeks ago, and when I got there, I said that I discovered it. I was like, "Hey, I've discovered Kentucky. I'm gonna call it Doug's Land of Adventure."
That's essentially what he did, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
yeah, you're right. I wrote about this a long time ago, but like one of the things that really puts me up the wall is when people are like Columbus or whoever needs to be judged by the standards of his own time. And it's like, well, they did judge Columbus and they thought he was a fucking monster. Like
yeah,
Columbus was brought back to Europe in chains and arrested because he was mistreating his own people and then also the natives. And there's a journal by I believe it was a priest who traveled with him who documented all the crimes and is like writing these down like all these horrors and like how his soldiers are like on the verge of mutiny because they don't want to commit any more mass atrocities and he was eventually stripped of all his titles
yeah,
and like sent into exile. And so when someone in like 2024 is like, well, like back in that day, he was okay. It's like, no, back in that day, he was a monster and they knew he was a monster. Like
yeah.
your your opinion on this is worse than like the 15th century queen of Spain, right?
And
Like
that's the thing is he wasn't even welcome in Spain. He was so disgusting that yeah, the queen was like, I do not want that piece of shit defiling our court. He's not allowed in the country. And so You're yeah. So anybody that today that defends Christopher Columbus, you are more stupid and actually more like ethically beneath the people of the 1500s. So
Who committed the Inquisition.
congratulations. But
Yeah.
back to so after Columbus discovered America, let's fast forward a couple years. James Madison built into the framework of the United States a philosophy of dividing the working class so that the elites could preserve their wealth and power. Can you give some examples of the ruling class sowing division uh, in or like in the working class in order to exploit us now? Like maybe someone whose name rhymes with Milan Pusk or
Yeah, I mean it's funny. I heard a saying, and I wish I could remember who said it, but I can't. But they said that capitalists were the most ardent Marxists. And what they meant by that is that Marxist theory of class is that every society has classes, right? In feudalism, there's like the lords and ladies, and then there are the feudal lords, and there are the peasants. In capitalism, there's the capitalists, and then there's the proletariat, the working class. And these classes are opposed to one another, like on a concrete level, not in their minds, but if you think about it in the most basic terms, if Jeff Bezos raises Amazon workers' wages, the workers' lives gets better, and Jeff Bezos's gets quote unquote worse because his profits go down, right? Um, and so what our ruling slash capitalist class will do is, like you said, find ways to divide people. This is mostly done today through the lens of culture wars. So anything we can think of that's an ism, a racism, sexism, transphobia, I would say is another one, is basically a way to distract people, in my opinion. And I'll give you an example. The president of the Teamsters, Sean O'Brien, which is a famous union, just spoke at the Republican National Convention yesterday, and he echoed the words of Josh Hawley, the, I believe, Missouri senator. I could be getting that wrong, but he's a senator. He's a
yeah.
Republican senator. And Hawley wrote a op-ed piece, whatever you want to call it, saying that like, oh, unions should turn to conservatives because conservatives get that unions are being forced to wave trans flags and like identify people's pronouns. And so what that clearly is Josh Hawley, who is a member of the upper echelons of our society, is trying to tell workers, your biggest problem is that some kid on Twitter or your boss says like, hey, we're just going to all go around the room and say each other's pronouns, right? So he's trying to get workers mad about someone who has no control over their life. Trans kids who are members of the working class. And that is an attempt to distract from the fact that the real enemy of the working class, and I don't mean enemy in like a hateful way or like a judgment way, I mean in a materialist way, right? Again, profits go up when wages go down, wages go up when profits go down, is the bosses, the capitalist class. So by directing the working class anger into social culture wars, getting them mad at Black people, immigrants, trans kids, whoever, they're sapping their energy away from unionization efforts, collective bargaining, and uniting. And this was actually, it's funny because it's such a different dynamic now, but Karl Marx wrote about, he has it wasn't an essay, I think it was one of the volumes of Capital, but it's called like the Irish worker paragraph. And he talks about the differences between a worker in England and a worker in Ireland. And basically says the English worker has been told that the Irish worker is their enemy, right? That the Irish worker will come to England, steal their job, that the Irish worker is an inferior race, not as smart as them, that the English worker should protect against the Irish worker. And a lot of the stuff sounds like you could copy and paste that today and switch out, American worker with Mexican migrant, white worker with Black worker, et cetera, et cetera. So this dynamic has really been going on since at least the start of capitalism. And definitely, if we think about all the feudal wars that Europe fought, like what did they always say? They said like, oh, cool, Germania, and those people over there are the French, and they just hate us, you know. So you
Yeah.
guys all got to go ahead and hate the French, and they never
Yeah.
it keeps them divided. Um, so that's basically like the core, and that's, in my opinion, the reason why culture wars exist, right? I don't really think anyone on the right, or I shouldn't say that. I don't think anyone, I think a lot of people on the right who like are really transphobic and push anti-trans policies don't really give a shit if people want to change their gender, because like they don't. I think the religious people, the very religious people probably do, because they see it as an affront to their belief. Um, but I think for the most part, like the reason Josh Hawley is writing transphobic op-eds is because he's a he runs on right to work. He's a very capitalist aligned politician, and he just wants to nullify the working class labor militancy, in my opinion.
You know,
Did that answer your question? Sorry, I just
yeah,
ranted
no,
for a
absolutely.
bit there.
No,
Yeah.
you made me think of a pop culture reference that I don't think a lot of people will get, but it's a show I was into a while back. It's called Warrior. It's based on the writings of Bruce Lee, like some of his fictional writing, uh, and they made a show out of it recently, like in the past at least 5 years. And it's but it's the whole, it's in San Francisco, and it's the tension between the Irish and the Chinese. So all the Irish, they've been here a little tiny bit longer. They came over, and a lot of them have fought in the Civil War, so they believe that they have the right to all the labor. And the Chinese are just now migrating into San Francisco, and at this point, the Irish have come across the country looking for work, and they're being pit against each other by the industrialists. So this class of what would equate to modern day billionaires are are forcing these two groups of extremely poor, people just living in abject poverty, both the Irish and the Chinese, and making them, they're getting into like gang fights to fight for the fucking right for a job I wouldn't do, like in modern time. I wouldn't do that shit for $1 million. I mean, like
Yeah.
like jobs that you like literally lose an arm doing, and you got to get into like a gang fight to get that to work in that like
Yeah.
unregulated factory. I don't know, man, you just made me think of that.
Yeah, but that's exactly what it is, right? It's like, there's a whole book called like how the Irish became white, and it's specifically about the Irish, but I think it also applies to Italian immigrants. How when they first came here, they weren't like considered what we see as white, right? Like
Yeah.
specifically WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and then as like Asian people, Hispanic people, Black people were emancipated. They were like, oh shit, like we've told the Irish and the Italians that they're part of this outer class. Now the outer class has more numbers. So Irish Catholics and Italians were like slowly brought in so that they would be like almost united on racial politics against other minorities. And so you're exactly right. It's like, oh, you got to go fight the Chinese for the privilege of working in this coal mine. It's like, well, let's take a step back here and see what's actually going on. Yeah.
The irony too of what you described, of how much that is like uh prison culture. Is it's as though, like you should, like labor shouldn't be like prison culture. And like we're like, oh well, hey, now we're outnumbered, so we're going to bring more guys into our little faction so that we have more numbers, and we're fucking
You're right, though.
what I
It's
want to
very
say.
tribal.
Oops,
Yeah.
I unplugged my headphones. Hold on. And I'm not going to edit that out. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave that mistake in.
Behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes. What I wanted to ask you, man. So you're a labor activist. Uh, how do we fight back against this? What can we do? You're telling me the Teamsters are out here fucking class traders? I mean, come on. What
Yeah.
did Jimmy Hoffa die for nothing? Like what can we do?
Yeah, so I am a labor activist. I help people unionize their workplaces here in Denver. The first thing I'll say is, in my experience, I don't mean to talk shit about the Teamsters. At least from the Teamsters local here, who has specifically, I've had conversations with the leader who says like, we want to make the union more inclusive, more open to the next generation. And he specifically named like gay rights is one of those things. So my assessment is that Sean O'Brien is like another in a long line of Teamster presidents who are more concerned with his own financial well-being than the actual status of his workers, which is why there's actually a cohort inside the Teamsters called the Teamsters for a Democratic Union who are trying to make the Teamsters more democratic so that they can get people rid of Sean O'Brien. So I'm not trying to tell people to like hate on the Teamsters or anything like that. To answer your
Also,
original,
I want to clarify too. I was just joshing, man.
okay,
I do not want
good.
I do not want a single Teamster in the world to have a fucking beef with me, man. I promise.
Yeah, they're the not fucking around crew. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good call. Um, what I would suggest people do is, especially in a time, whatever your politics are, I think people are really despondent about national politics right now. They're like, my choices are Trump and Biden. And Trump is more unhinged than he was last time, and Biden is a lot older than he was last time. And I'm just like deflated. Is I would tell you to look at the politics around you, local politics, state politics, even. And even the politics of your workplace. And of course, again, I'm a labor activist, so I'm biased, but I believe that unionizing your workplace is one of the most effective things you can do to improve your lives, to improve the lives of your family and the lives of your community. One of the biggest things I run into when I meet new workers who are trying to organize is they always tell me like, hey, I want you to know, like, I don't hate working here. Like, this is not like I'm not trying to get anybody fired. I'm not trying to do anything like that. And that is because a lot of people have this misconception that organizing your workplace is something you do if you hate your boss. And that's not true. Organizing your workplace is something you do is if you want your workplace to be better or you want to preserve how good it is. And so I would encourage people to look into organizing. I'm a member of EWOC, that's EWOC, the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. If you want to get started, you can check out their website, sign up for someone to contact you. And I really believe, one, this will help you feel a lot less despondent because I think a lot of people look at the national stage and they're like, what can I do? I'm just one vote in what is probably an already determined state, if we're being honest, right? Like national elections come down to 100,000 votes across the Midwest. And unless you're in one of those states, there's not a whole lot you can do.
Yeah.
Organizing your workplace will help you feel like keep you sane. And the other thing is, I think it really brings out what we were talking about earlier, like that class recognition, that people are much less likely to be racist, transphobic, whatever it is, if you are uniting with them in struggle against your employer. Because once you're on like a collective bargaining agreement or a picket line or something like that, it is very clear who your friends are and who your enemies are, right? There's no more like, oh, well, Donald Trump said that I can't keep up. The queer teachers are grooming my kids who will somehow replace my wage. There's none of that bullshit, right? It's you and your fellow workers, and you're going to your boss and you're saying, pay us more. And they're saying no. And so if you're someone like me who's very scared about the social conservatism or social reactionaryism, I think unionizing your workplace is one of the best ways to push back on that because it shows everyone you work with and people in your community that like whether you're black, brown, white, gay, straight, whatever your religion, like if you're a member of the working class, your interest and your life will get better if you unite and struggle against your bosses. And I think once you cut through all the bullshit, all the political rhetoric, and you get to that point, people realize that, and they're not going to be susceptible to, the quote unquote immigrants are stealing your job type bullshit because they're going to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I'm on a picket line. There's no immigrant coming to take my job. You, my boss, are just telling me that you can't pay me anymore, and I know exactly how much you make in profits. So
Yeah.
that's my suggestion to anyone. Of course, I am a labor organizer, so you know,
Well,
I
but
really enjoy this stuff.
it's my current belief that unions are probably the what would, I mean, I don't want to use like the word utopia, but possibly, stop a dystopia. That'd be the best way to put it. And there's a food chain too. There's something to think about is that it's not just your immediate boss, your middle management fucker ahead up top of you. So it's a food chain, and it goes all the way up to like a handful of companies. They're all like multi conglomerates. So no matter who you work for, you still end up, at some way or another, you work for like the Waltons or Amazon or it's like they probably own whatever owns the company you work for. If you're not
Yeah,
completely self employed, so it's always good to push back. Um, I want to ask this. I know you've already given a lot of great advice, so of debating, uh, labor activism. And I just want to say to everyone, we've talked about some negative shit today, and we didn't even get to overseas policy. But I mean, fuck, it's one podcast, guys. Uh, I know things look grim. I know it might seem dismal, but we have to end this on a motivating note. I truly believe I don't like when people do political podcasts where they just bitch and they say it's all fucked up, and then they walk away from the microphone and don't I and I but I want to hear your thoughts on this, and maybe and I know this is a big challenge because you've already given some good points in the things that are in your wheelhouse, but can you give me three things I can do and the people that are listening can do to push back against the dystopia and create real change for a brighter future? What are three things you think are concrete, doable things?
definitely. This might be cheating. I'm gonna go back to number one is organize your workplace. I think that is huge because um, if you have an organized workplace with a union contract and Trump can win the election, your union contract is still in place, and Trump could be dictator for life. And anything absent of like, full blown fascist America, like you will be legally protected. That would be number one. Two, this might seem trivial. I say find ways to get engaged in your community. I think we're so isolated nowadays, and this might sound cliche, but like if you can join some sort of community organization, whether that's a political group, big brother, big sister, something like that. One, I think they do good. Two, it'll help your own sanity. I think getting out of the house and getting away from social media and stopping the doom scrolling, and of course, uh, say as I or do as I say, not as I do, because
Yeah.
I'm addicted to just scrolling through like videos of our hellscape. I think that will help you a lot mentally, and I think that's kind of the first step to making things better is once you accept like, okay, like there's still a lot of good in this world, and I think social media has a way of only highlighting the bad, especially with news and politics, right?
Yeah.
That would be number two. As for number three, I would I would encourage people to I think political education is a big one. I think it can be really hard to see the scope of history from where we are now. And I'll give you examples like, you know, if you were a slave in 1850, like in the United States, or rather if you were an enslaved person, um, you probably didn't fathom a life out of freedom, right? Like people who ran away were frequently caught. Um, it was your life. And then 20 years later, not everything was great, but you were free, right? And we can look at that through any prism in history. I'm writing a book right now. One of my examples is like a medieval peasant who someone says like, hey, you should be able to elect your king. Like the medieval peasant can't fathom that. They're like, what are you talking about voting for a king? Like he's the king. He
Yeah.
was given this land by God. Um, and I think a good way to escape the doomerism and the bad thoughts and all that is to I'm gonna plug myself here, but one thing I try and do with my writing is like show people that like we've been in bad spots in history before. People have been in worse spots, and not I'm not saying that as like a oh you're doing great like suck it up type thing, but like we've overcome more before. This isn't the first time we've been had our backs against the wall as a country, as a society, a species, whatever you want to think there. So I'd say expand your worldview. Start reading some different literature. Maybe dive into history a little book. Dive into history a little bit, or try and find some programs such as this that give you a wider view of the world, because people have gone through some really dark shit in our time, and we still managed to come out on top. And there are lessons to be learned there, right? Like even in the history lessons of what went bad, we can analyze like, okay, how did the fascists take power in Nazi Germany? Like what went wrong there? Let's not make that mistake again.
Yeah.
So those would be my three things. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly on all of that. Obviously, labor organizing your workplace. 100% get out, get involved in the community. Man, go find do you like animals and plants and trees like I do? Go join. There's always groups in most states and cities where you can go plant some fucking trees. And the
Oh
thing is
yeah.
too, like there are, as much as you do see on the media, just the most vile people. That's just because they're the most loud people. The world is full of incredible people doing incredible work, trying to stop climate change, trying to stop fascism. And I, you know, I was asking you, but I was just saying, like, seek those people out. Look, don't give up, because they giving up is what they fucking want you. When you give up, then they win, man. Like, so that's what I say, man. Don't give up. Joe, I got one last question for you, man. It's the last question today. Most important question. I love your by the way, I love your Substack. Can you
Thank you.
please tell everyone how they can find you, follow you, and read what you write?
Yeah, definitely. So everything I write, whether I write it independently on my Substack or write for a publication, I publish on joewrote.com. That's JOEWROTE.com. That is a Substack. So you'll also find me on there, like social media notes function, on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. I'm actually just Joe Wrote now, so it's just Joe Wrote. I'm on all the socials, way too much time on there. So again, do as I say, not as I do. Yeah, come drop me a line, hang out, and yeah, thanks for having me on, Doug. This
Oh yeah.
was an absolute blast.
I'll drop a link in the description so people can get to the newsletter, Substack, all that stuff easier. And yeah, Joe, thanks so much for being here, man.
Yeah, of course.
Peace.